Well, not all senators are convinced of the administration's vaccination program. Senator Franklin Drilon calls it, quote, suntok sa buwan, while Senators Lacson and Tito Sotto say plans are only as good as the execution. Let's now hear the take of Senator Win Gatchalian, joining us tonight on the program. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator. In your view, do our kababayans have a right, the freedom to choose which vaccine to take, or you know what, we can be picky and just accept what the government gives us?
Rico, I've been tracking down the global distribution of vaccine, and the issue here is supply. And everyone is scrambling to get their hands on supply and bring them back to their own countries. In fact, to date, I was looking at the Bloomberg tracker. There are only 30 million doses of vaccines that were distributed globally. So if you're targeting almost 7 billion people, everyone is scrambling to get a share of their vaccine. So the issue here is supply. And because the issue is supply, we have to prioritize the most vulnerable and also the frontliners. And that's why the government came out with their prioritization. But even with the prioritization, the vaccine supply is not enough to supply all of them.
But Senator Win,
this is actually the issue on hand.
But Senator Win, the supply that's coming in February is from Sinovac. And there are still a lot of question marks about the efficacy of this Chinese vaccine, which is between 50 to 55%. So the government is saying now that it is voluntary. But these are 25 million doses. But what if we don't want them? What if most of the population do not want a Sinovac? The government is spending our money to procure these precious doses. What if we don't want them? Then 25 million down the drain.
For me, Rico, the issue is we have to make sure that the vaccines coming here are effective and also safe. And because everyone's getting their trying to get their hands on cheap vaccines and also the most effective vaccines, there are now a lot of issues on supply. Let me just give you a very specific example. Here in Valenzuela, we signed with to supply us with 40% of our population. So that's close to about 400,000. And we were telling them, supply it to us immediately. But they can only commit, and they didn't even commit a specific date, committed only around July to supply us with AstraZeneca. Of course, that's our preference. No, in Venezuela here, we prefer to get AstraZeneca because it's more effective. The efficacy rate is about 90%, and it's also cheap. It's only 500 peso per 2 doses already.
That's right.
But the thing is, when can we get our supply? And this is how the issue. So when the thing about Sinovac is, personally, I don't. I would rather choose the most effective because they're the most economical. But we're also racing against how fast can we inoculate our constituents. And
so Senator,
we were made to understand that the Sinovac is the one readily available because they've produced a lot of it ready to distribute in our region.
So, Senator, if we are racing against time and we have to inoculate this population, I'll put you in a situation. Are you ready to be inoculated with a Sinovac vaccine?
You know, for me, Rico, as long as it's approved by FDA, he has to go through the approval process. And as long as it's approved by FDA, I'm okay to be inoculated with whatever brand. The point here is it has to go through our regulatory process. That's why we have our regulatory process. And our regulatory process will not release these drugs if it's not safe and it's not effective. So as long as it passed through our FDA process, I'm confident to be inoculated with whatever brand, whether it's Sinovac, whether it's Pfizer, whether it's AstraZeneca. I'm fine with that.
So even though there's a difference in the efficacy, because Sinovac is currently at 50%, and then you have AstraZeneca at about 60 to 92%, and then you have Pfizer and Moderna at 95%. Aren't you willing to wait for the right vaccine that has a higher efficacy to get yourself immunized?
This is where the dilemma is, no? Because we're racing against time to open our economy. And the sooner we open our economy, the better for us to recover. And the thing is, even though we want the most effective drugs, it's not available. It might be available, like for example, I made a very specific, in Valenzuela, it's available second half of the year, but they're
Right.
not committing to that. They give us a time frame between July all the way to August. So we're not even sure if we're going to
Yeah.
get our vaccine. But in the meantime, we want to get our lives back to normal. We want our businesses to go up.
Yeah.
So this is where the dilemma is.
Yeah, there's really a dilemma there because there are a lot of Filipinos who were questioning that if Sinovac is so good, how come no private companies or LGUs purchased it for their people? Even Davao City got AstraZeneca and of course, Valenzuela got AstraZeneca. Some are even saying, is it because there's a kickback?
Well, I don't know about that, Rico, but to be honest about it, AstraZeneca is the most aggressive here in the Philippines. And I have first-hand information experience about that. They've been contacting local governments, and that's why the tripartite agreement came about. In fact, the way to hasten the distribution of the vaccine is to employ the help of our local government units. That's why they devised that tripartite agreement, even though the vaccine is not commercially available. And just going with local government, no? Yesterday in our hearing, there are things that we can improve to improve the distribution of the vaccine. And one of which is to ask the help of our local government units, let them contract with the different vaccine manufacturers in order for them to distribute to their most vulnerable.
Right.
If it's too centralized, it will really take time. And we've seen that with the testing. Remember, Rico, during the last year, during the initial part of the lockdown, there was only RITM. But when they released it to the local governments and asked the local governments to help the national government, all of a sudden, all of these local governments are putting up testing centers. This should be employed with the vaccine distribution.
Thank you so much for your insights, Senator Win Gatchalian.